Well, good morning, everyone. Certainly the lake level is on the minds of myself, my administration, our town board, and all the residents that live along the 8 miles of shoreline in the town of Greece. So I thought I'd give an update, a briefing on where we stand today and what it looks like for the next several weeks going forward. As of today, the lake is at 247.4 feet. Now, where we have concerns is when we see it at 248. That's when we start noticing some issues here in the town of Greece with the lake level. The current water flow at the Robert Moses Saunders Dam is at 7,600 meters per second as of right now. Now that fluctuates frequently, not only daily, but several times during the day. As a member of the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board Advisory Board, I get updates, like I say, in many cases, several times a day of the water flow. Sometimes it's increased, sometimes decreased. And what determines that, in part, is the water flow out of the Ottawa River. Now, the good news is the Ottawa River is right now, looks like it's stabilizing or equalizing, so therefore, that will not be as a significant factor going forward in the regulation of the water flow at the Robert Moses Dam. What does that mean? It means that the focus will be more on Lake Ontario water levels, and the Ottawa River will not be as big of a factor as it has been thus far. As we know, there are many factors that go into the flow of the water going through that dam, and that being one of them that won't weigh as heavily going forward. That's good news for all the residents along the lakeshore. The predictions and the looking forward, what will happen with the lake level is very bright, in so much as it looks like the lake will peak over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We do not expect any levels near 19 or 17 levels, and the peak will be a very brief period. They're expecting it to only be a week or two. So therefore, the levels that we're seeing right now, it's not going to get much higher. And if it does get higher, it will only be for a very brief period of time. So we do not anticipate any situation that we've seen in the past. Now, on the other hand, it is Mother Nature. And even the best weatherman cannot predict the weather very much into the future. But again, based upon all that we're seeing right now, it looks like we should be in pretty good shape going forward. However, in the event that things change and go in a different direction, I can tell you that we in the town have taken many steps to improve the situation opposed to what we saw in 17. We've learned a lot since 17. We saw that it was evident even in 19 that the damage was not nearly as drastic as we saw in 17. For example, one of the major improvements at my direction, we put in 30 shutoff valves on the stormwater drains. Now, what does that mean? What happens is when the water runs into the roads, it then drains into the ponds and into the lake. And what we saw in 17 was that the lakes and the ponds were higher than the roads. So what was happening is the water from the lake and the ponds were running into the roads, thus flooding the roads for several months. What we've installed since then is shutoff valves on all of those drains. So when the water reaches that level, we can shut those valves off so that it doesn't continue to flood the roads. We've installed 30 of them. So that situation won't repeat itself as it did in 17. We also constructed a berm down at the eastern end of Edgemere Drive near Dewey Avenue so that the pond doesn't flow into the street. We contain the pond within the banks of the pond. And we've established a new higher bank there. And as you remember, back in 17, that end of the roadway was flooded for several months and made it impassable. So we hope with that construction that would never happen again with higher water levels. We've also invested $12 million in our sanitary sewer system. What we saw in 17 was because many of the homes along the shoreline were constructed decades ago, perhaps as much as almost 100 years ago, the sanitary sewer and storm sewer lines were combined as one. And what would happen is as people were pumping out their basements with their sump pumps, it was going into the sanitary sewer system, which was overwhelming it. And we had to, as a result, chlorinate the water and pump it into Long Pond, which was a vicious cycle because we'd pump it into Long Pond would flow into the roads, ultimately flowing into the basements, and we'd start the whole cycle all over again. It was an endless cycle. And also it was deadheading into the county sewer system. The water had nowhere to go. We couldn't get rid of it. So it was a bad situation. What we've done now is spend $12 million going from one end of Edgemere along the lakeshore to the other. It's nearly complete. It's about 80% complete, the project, where we've separated the sanitary sewers from the stormwater. Therefore, when people pump their basements, that water is not going into the sanitary sewer system, overwhelming it and causing this problem. So we've taken many measures. We've also are prepared, as we were in 17, with crews that if we need to put pumps, 30 to 40 pumps out like we did before. We had 250,000 sandbags in place. When we requested the sandbags early in 17 and I contacted the state and said we needed 40,000 sandbags, they laughed. They said we would never need that. At the end of the day, we went through over 250,000. I think now they understand when we put in the request for sandbags and we tell them how many we need, there will be no delays. They will understand the need that we have here in the town of Greece. So we're better prepared. We don't think we're going to need them this year. We believe that the lake is close to peaking. And again, because of what occurred in 17, the IJC is more responsive than they were in 17. The IJC members are all different than they were in 17. The attitude of those in 17 were that, well, the folks that live along the lake have to live with this. That's not the attitude of the current members or the most recent previous board of the IJC. They understand that it has to be dealt with in a better way than the board members back in 17, their attitude. So I think we're in much better shape to deal with whatever comes our way. But again, I think we're going to be okay this year. All the indicators are that we will be, even though the water is higher than it was last year. With that, I'll answer or entertain any questions from the press. They're expecting that in the somewhere in the middle of June, maybe the second to third week, maybe even sooner, and then you'll start seeing the lake levels continue to go down. And the other thing is, with this, it's not just the lake level, it's the winds from the north. It's a combination. We have had, the past several months, high winds, but it's a combination of the high winds with the high lake levels that cause the destruction. That's what we saw in 17. It was a combination of both. So it takes both those elements to cause the destruction along our shoreline in Greece.
The governor mentioned something about the rainfall yesterday being a concern. Anything to that end? Just past week we've been having a lot of rain. Has that made it worse?
Well, rainfall is certainly a consideration, but the rainfall, understand the water that we deal with here comes all the way from Lake Superior. And some of that water takes a year or two to get to this point. So rainfall, yes, is a factor. The snow melt certainly is a factor, but some of it is in the years in the making. So a heavy rainfall today, yes, but it's much more than that. And it's much more than what happens right here in town. It could be something that's occurring in another state that affects the water ultimately that we receive here. Much higher. They were much higher, and again, combined with much higher winds. And they were sustained. The lake levels were higher for a longer period of time, for months. Again, because the plan that was in effect and the folks at the IJC weren't as responsive back then. They allowed the water to remain higher. I'm not going to say exactly what their thoughts were, but they were much more concerned with other. As a member of the board, there's different entities that represent different interests. I represent the interests of the lakeshore residents along the entire Great Lakes, from the beginning to the ocean. Other people represent the interests of shipping. Others represent the interests of hydropower. Those are not the areas of my concern. But I think some of those people, because before I was involved in the board, there was no representation for the residents. So the people that represented shipping and hydro were the voices and the only voices that were heard. And the residents had no voice. And therefore, they're those are the interests that were dealt with, and everyone along the lakeshore had nobody speaking up for them. And since that time, it's a different situation now, and I'm not one to be bashful, so we've seen some changes.
Can you speak to the urgency of coming out like this? Do you think residents should be taking action right now, or strapping down patio furniture, boats, anything like that?
Well, I think they've learned that, they have to make sure that they take care of their own property. But also, I think they've learned that we as the town of Greece will be there for them. We've had, going back to 17 and since then, we've had in the town people from throughout the Northeast United States contact us as to how we did it. And I can tell you that most areas along the southern shore of the Great Lakes did not get the response. Some did, Sodus had good response, but many did not have the same response from their community as we did. And I think the people of Greece know that we're going to be there for them, and I think that gives them a level of comfort. But they have to make sure they do all they can to protect their property, keep us informed. I was up and down the road all day and night, and I would very often greet the people, and they tell me they need a pump, they need a hose, whatever, and we'd get that for them. So that constant communication, we did a lot of communication ourselves with Facebook, and that was an easy way for them to communicate with us and with me. So we have those measures in place, but they have to make sure they do all they can to protect their own property. And a lot of them certainly have done that with reinforcing break walls and decks, and I'm sure they don't want to go through that again. But I think the homeowners are better prepared, and we as a town are better prepared.
Do any homeowners want to come to the podium? Okay, yeah. Yeah, we're one-on-ones, it's fine. There were some off topics I wondered if I can ask, but it doesn't have to.
We can do one-on-one on other topics then. All right, well, thank you all. Appreciate it.